Hi folks, this is video number 177 and the title is My Deer Forensic Kit. You ever notice the range of motion of a white-tailed deer? Keep that in mind as we go through this. This deer was recently harvested. Notice how red it is inside. This deer was harvested sometime earlier. Notice how dark the inside is. Ambient temperature has an effect on the coloration. Hunters in my time stayed in camp usually 2 days to a week. Looking at these 4 deer, you'll notice the one on the right is very dark. If the temperature was fairly constant, perhaps 45 degrees, this one was harvested early the day before. The next deer is mostly dark, probably later the day before. The other 2 on the left are mostly still red inside. They were harvested midday the next day. The lower the temperature, the faster the meat will cool and darken. Back in the early 80s, I came across a wildlife forensic class offered at a college in the Midwest. I couldn't attend, but I could purchase all the books. I proceeded to train myself. Besides having to do some studying, you needed some equipment. A plain old double-sided tackle box worked for me. For range of motion, a good tape measure was needed. A clipboard and graph paper is a must for plotting muscle reaction and eye fluid amounts at current temperatures. You need a thermometer to measure the outside or ambient temperature. Temperature is a key reference. Syringes to withdraw and measure the remaining fluid in the eye. The upper eye that's shown is fairly fresh. The lower has dried considerably. Stainless steel pins are needed to test muscle reflexes when zapped with electricity. I use turkey needles to hold in stuffing. Next would be a pair of lightweight jumper wires with alligator clips, at least 8 feet long, for muscle testing. As deer cool after harvest and field dressed, the meat will darken. The colder the temperature, the faster the meat cools and darkens. Notice how dark the meat is on this partially butchered deer hindquarter. I'm interjecting a little story about cold temperatures in deer season. A couple of years when Lou and I patrolled together, it was very cold. I think more or less 20 degrees. Besides the usual license and ear tag checks, we also gathered info for the biologist. Example, we measured girth with weight tapes and checked tooth wear to approximate the deer's age. When it's really cold, then the best place to fill out forms was my truck hood. We found it necessary to carry a bunch of pens in our shirt pocket, nestled under our down vests and winter uniform coats. At 20 degrees with wind, you could only get about 3 letters written, and the pen would freeze. Had to swap it out. One of us would measure, and the other would write. Lots of fun. Now, back to how to make a dead deer kick. First, get the deer on the ground and as close to your vehicle as possible. You will want a bit of slack in the jumper wires. Next, unplug the number 1 cylinder spark plug wire. Remember, I was doing this back in the 80s. Electronic ignitions were in the fledgling stage, mostly used in top-end vehicles like Lincolns and Caddies. You might have to use a lawnmower today. The next thing to do is find a muscle to test. You have to do it by feel, with the hide still on. I only pulled out my forensic box a few times. I only took it out in situations where the deer was totally black inside and the season was less than 2 hours old. The next thing you do is insert a turkey pin in each end of that muscle you found. Attach one end of the red wire to one of the pins, the other end to the spark plug. Attach the black wire to the other pin and the other end to the spark plug wire. The hunter who tagged the deer would be watching me preparing to test the deer's reflexes. I would explain to him exactly what I was doing. About the time I got the pins in place and started to hook them up, each time the hunter would stop me and confess that he shot the deer about 12 hours before. They all settled on field receipts and paid the fines right there. I never had to present my findings in court. Heck, I never even used any graph paper. Wildlife forensics has come a long way since the 80s. Do a search. You will be amazed what goes on in the realm of conservation law enforcement. Something to consider in regard to today's attitude towards law enforcement. Game wardens deal with the same people the police do, especially in suburban and rural areas. Well, that concludes my story about my deer forensic kit. As usual, folks, I wish everyone all the best.